Welcome to SlashBack Cinema. I'm Shawnee.
And I'm Ryan.
We've been friends since the 80s, and our childhood was built on comic books, video games, and horror movies. So we've been wondering how the horror movies of our childhood stack up against movies today.
So we decided to revisit classic horror films from the 70s, 80s, and 90s, the ones that haunted us, thrilled us, and kept us awake at night. Do they still hold up? Or were our kid brains just easier to scare?
Grab your flashlight, pull the covers up tight, and join us as we find out if those horror classics from our memories still slay or if they've lost their bite. Ryan, what are we serving up today?
Today on the menu, we've got The Changeling from 1980. This is a Canadian supernatural horror film directed by Peter Medak and starred George Scott and Trish Van Devere.
We should acknowledge that I don't think either of us ever heard of this movie. We did it because someone online recommended it.
So I had shared the podcast on a Reddit forum and got a lot of great feedback, but one of the commenters had recommended this as a watch. I had heard of it, but really didn't know anything about it.
Who do we owe thanks for suggesting this movie?
So this user's handle was OKAccident3892.
Okay, accident. Well, thank you. Now we get to talk about whether or not this movie was an accident.
Perfect. Nice segue. Well done.
Let's talk about what this is about. Do you want to give us a quick summary of this movie?
The Changeling follows hoser John Russell, and he moves into this historic mansion after the tragic loss of his family. There was this terrible accident. Upon moving into the house, he discovers that it's haunted by the ghost of a murdered child seeking justice. And John starts to unravel this mystery of what's happening, decades-long cover-up, and it involves this powerful senator and a dark family secret. But it is essentially a haunted house movie, which we haven't done any of those on SlashBack, so I was excited to watch one of those for this episode.
Are you a fan of haunted house movies generally? Do you have a favorite haunted house movie?
I was captivated by the idea of paranormal and hauntings as a kid. Growing up, I don't know if you remember this. For those that know it, it'll be a Gen X kind of throwback nostalgia. Reader's Digest published the Book of Strange Stories and Amazing Facts. And my grandparents had it at their house, so I would go over there every weekend. And there were two things that I did there. One was go through my grandfather's watch collection. He was a watchmaker, and I just would spend hours looking through his drawers. And then the rest of the time was reading this book over and over and over again. And they had this entire chapter of paranormal activity and ghost stories. And it just really fired up all those dopamine receptors as a small 12-year-old boy. So it was haunted house stuff. Really, I always dug it and I love it. So yeah, big fan.
Because I remember you being really into ghosts, and my recollection is you always believed in that stuff or wanted to believe in that stuff, and that I was always the skeptic and was like, I don't think so. I think that human beings are unreliable narrators of the events that happen to them. But I always feel like we've talked about the fact that you were raised evangelical, and there's this interesting connection. I've always found this fascinating. A lot of evangelicals believe in ghosts and think that supernatural stuff is real. And they may think it's demonic and evil, but they still think that it exists, that the Dungeons and Dragons really can open up a demonic realm. And you were kind of like that. You were both evangelical, and also you believed that this stuff was probably true.
I think that idea that there's another dimension to reality, and for evangelicals, it's defined as heaven and hell. I think there's also other views of reality and dimensions, and this veil between what we perceive versus maybe it's another dimension, maybe it's just another layer to reality. It always was really interesting to me. Whether or not you believe it or have that either direct experience that some people have, and it's wanting to believe that maybe you're right, they see or hear something, and then it layers on to something they were thinking about, and it could be coincidence, it could be synchronicity. I do think that idea of the material world is only the real world is probably just a limitation of our senses perceiving whatever those inputs are. Essentially, we're just getting electricity, vibration, light, stimulus, frequency coming into our brain, and we're interpreting it a certain way. So who's to say what's real and what's not? So it's always been an interesting space to me.
Both of us live in pretty old houses, right?
Yeah, mine's 1796 or 97. So it's friggin' old.
Do you have examples of your house of weird sounds or things happening?
So our house is small. It's not a huge space, and we did a remodel and a bit of an open floor plan. So I've never felt like there was anything in this house, but even if there was a ghost, I would just turn my head and I could see the entire downstairs. So it's there's no place to actually be creeped out by the ghost. I will say that we have a dirt floor, and so if you go in the basement, it's just stone and dirt, and there's a giant cistern from the friggin' Ring, if you saw that movie. Like that is what it is in our basement. This old water tank. It definitely has the creepy vibe. And then doing some research because it's on this National Historic Register site. Apparently, at one point in time, whoever was here had found all these headstones in the basement. So some shit definitely went down. One story I wanted to share. When I first met Jen, we lived in Colorado. It's this old mining town, Breckenridge ski area. She and her friend rented this old miner's cabin right in the downtown area.
Mhm.
And when she was leasing it, the guy was like, hey, you know, just a heads up, there's been some stories of hauntings or just some weird stuff in the house. And that place was definitely haunted. Like it had this vibe to it. And you would go over there, and they both experienced this where there'd be like this noise in the other room and the chair would be rocking on its own. Like there was some freaky stuff that went down in that house, and enough to the point of like hearing weird noises at night or stuff coming from the basement. The guy was like, never go down there. And so there was this like hatch to the basement, which neither of us ever did. Like I was just like, I'm not going down there. Like, and so one night we hung out and I went home to my place. And she calls me the next morning and she's like, oh my God, there is a broken window, blood everywhere. And I'm like, what's going on? And she goes into the other room and there's this guy laying on her couch who in the middle of the night had broken into the house. He was drunk as a skunk. And ultimately it wound up being that he thought this was his place. I mean, I don't know why you would break into your own house like that, but he broke in, knocked everything over, stumbled to the couch and passed out drunk. And so I was like, why are you calling me? Call the police. Yeah. She calls the police come, they, you know, take the guy away, whatever. And I'm like, didn't you guys hear anything? Like, what the hell? And they're like, oh yeah, we just thought it was the ghost. We heard this loud smash and like this big noise. And they're like, oh, it's just the ghosts. Either of them got up to actually see what had happened until the morning. And yeah, so.
Wow, I never heard a story like that. That could be the real problem with ghosts, is you misinterpret actual people breaking into your house as ghosts. That's the safety problem.
Yeah,
you don't know when you're really in danger then.
So, right, it was the ghost that cried wolf or something. I don't know. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into this movie. I was kind of surprised by it. It's a little different than what I expected, in part because it was very unclear to me who the villain was supposed to be. It's in a normal haunted house movie. The ghost is the bad guy. And then there's some movies that have the twist on that. Beetlejuice had this, where the ghosts are the good guy and then the people are the bad guys. In this movie, the only character who could be interpreted as a bad guy, like, died 70 years before the movie starts. Like, in the plot of the movie, it's such a complicated plot. I'm not even sure it's worth explaining the whole thing. But it's basically a guy in 1909 drowned his son, and now the son is the ghost that's in the house. And the son wants, like, the new owner of the house to discover the story of his murder. But that means the kid who drowned, the ghost, is not actually a bad guy. And the guy in the house, played by George C. Scott, who I think he's beloved in lots of movies, but the movie you and I most appreciate him from is Exorcist 3. Do you remember that?
Yes.
So watching the movie, I oftentimes wasn't clear what was supposed to be scary, because I'm like, well, the kid, the ghost, just wants to, like, have his story told and his murder revealed. And George C. Scott, that's the other funny thing I want to talk to you about. He doesn't seem easily riled up. He is the most, like, implacable, like, relaxed guy. There's a scene where he's looking in a mirror, and the mirror breaks.
Glass, oh, that's an awesome scene. I love that scene. Yeah,
shoots into his face. And George C. Scott, like, literally pulls a piece of glass out of his neck and just goes about his day. It's like if Clint Eastwood were in a horror movie. He is so unstartled by anything. I've never seen a horror movie where a guy was so unfrightened by everything going on around him. And there's a scene where he just yells at the noises in the house, like, "What the fuck do you want from me?"
Goddamn son of a bitch. What is it you want? What do you want from me?
I would have run screaming from that house.
Yeah.
He was, like, just irritated that the ghost kept opening and closing doors and throwing things downstairs. And I've never seen a movie like this.
he immediately goes from music composer to private investigator, doing all this research and really trying to figure out what the story is. Right. His overall demeanor with the backdrop of all this paranormal activity, he is pretty unfazed and just kind of goes about the business of trying to actually reveal what this hidden story is. And it was also interesting in that you're speaking about like who's the bad guy and that being a bit gray. Like even the senator, who you could sort of say was maybe being set up as a villain. And again, spoiler alerts all across the board here, but it really appeared that he did not know. Maybe he had a feeling, but he didn't really know what his dad. Maybe he didn't even know he was adopted.
Right.
What his dad had done to set in motion all this stuff. So it was a revelation to him and this reckoning with this vengeful spirit.
Yeah, that's basically the big twist. And also the explanation of the movie is the boy dies, and the boy was supposed to inherit like millions of dollars, but the boy was also born very sick and in a wheelchair. So the dad's plot is he drowns his own son, but he tells people that his son is just ill. Then he flies like off to Europe and adopts a kid, comes back to the United States and introduces the adopted child as his son. And then the adopted child gets all the money. And the adopted child then grows up and becomes a senator and doesn't even know this whole story. So he's not the villain either. So I found it kind of fascinatingly weird. It's weird that the guy living in the house, he seems unsettled a little bit, like he's annoyed at the stuff the house is doing. But he just, like you said, he acts like a private investigator who just wants to like find out the actual story of this murder. And for some reason, he's a music teacher. I think the only reason that's in the plot is because this movie is based on like a real thing that happened to a guy. Did you read about this?
Right. Yeah. I
thought you would love this.
Yeah. Russell Hunter, supposedly the backstory there is that this was based on events he experienced. So he was the writer of this movie who lived in Denver, and he lived in Henry Treat Rogers' house. So this old 1800s home. And supposedly he had been hearing all these weird noises or experiencing this phenomenon and found this hidden room where there was this bouncing ball. And he finds this journal that tells this story of a young man who died. And apparently there was inheritance associated with this kid, and had the same story that we just talked about in terms of adoption and the kid being in ill health and all that. And the story might be a little embellished and slightly shaky.
Little punch up. Yeah.
Yeah, a little punch up. Yeah.
George C. Scott was tough. He was intimidating. He was more intimidating than anything the ghost did in the entire movie.
I mean, do you think so? So that dude, he must have been in his like 70s when he made this movie.
I actually did the math. Right, you might want to sit down for this. He was our age. He was 53 years old.
So, all right, let's talk about that, because the very first scene, opens up with him, and it's like this old 70s station wagon and his wife and his kid, and they're trying to push this. It's a snowy mountain pass. Their car is broken down or something, and the three of them are pushing this car down the road, but he's pushing the car, and it looks like he's going to drop dead of a heart attack. Like I would not call him prime physical shape in this film. I thought he was like 77 or something in this movie. Apparently he was 52. And so I'm watching him like, wow, this guy, it's going to collapse. Like right out of the gate, he's not going to make it through this movie.
He was a hard 52. Yeah, I had exactly the same thought you did. Like, how old was this guy during this movie? And the fact that, it was filmed in 1979 and he was born in 1927, the math on that was startling. I thought, I have not exactly taken care of myself, but I'm looking much better than George C. Scott, who easily looks like he's 70.
Yeah, he was looking rough. And, but, apparently his wife looked like she was like in her 20s.
Yes, she's in the movie. Yeah, she plays this other character. And
well, I think so. That's his actual wife
right.
Later in the film, Claire, who is Tris Van Deveray. But his original wife in the film, the family at the beginning,
right,
who gets killed, like even she looked like she was, barely 30.
So Trish Van Deveray, who is his wife in real life, was 15 years younger than he was. So she was like in her 30s when he was in his 50s. And she responds to the horror movie like you want a haunted house character to respond. She is constantly flipping out, sobbing, panicking. her character resonated with me more than anybody else. I'm like, that's the correct response to living in this house is constant tears and terror and shock. And she can barely control herself. And yeah, I thought she was giving the performance that that you expect from a haunted house character.
Exactly.
Wait in the car.
Oh, no, you're not going back in there. No, please, no.
One thing before we move on to favorite scenes that is kind of struck me was stylistically, this film felt more akin to a 1970s film versus 1980s. Like, I know it was right on that bridge year of, I think it came out in 80, but you're saying it was filmed in 79. It reminded me much more of The Omen or maybe Black Christmas. It had a much more 70s feel, the way it was shot,
Right.
the look, versus some of these other films that we've been watching, like Night of the Comet or whatever. So even though Night of the Comet was only 4 years later, it almost felt like decades apart.
This movie came out the same year as The Shining. They both came out in 1980. The Shining is such a terrifying horror movie. 2 years later, Poltergeist came out. I think that movie was really scary. This movie, it feels like it's from a different era. I was actually thinking it feels closer to a 1960s movie, and that it's just not emotionally intense the way that I'm used to haunted house movies being. And I really think that hinges on George C. Scott's performance because he's so intense and unintimidated. And the way the plot is set up, you learn pretty early, the ghost is this little kid who it just died in an unfortunate way, and he's not actually trying to harm anybody.
Well, he isn't, but then we'll talk about it in a little bit.
Yeah.
Things do switch. You do get a sense of perhaps ghosts of 7-year-old boys don't have the best emotional regulation, especially when they've been locked in a room and then drowned by their father. So
Yes.
there's a little pent-up aggression that
He does have like temper tantrums.
Shit goes down late in the last quarter of this movie.
And as we've talked about in other episodes, George C. Scott responds like a 1980s dad whose kid is having a temper tantrum, which is perfect. Yes. Right.
One thing that I was thinking about that is so prominent in this genre is in a horror movie, I really feel like they should be crediting the house because that is such a character and part of these films, like The Shining. You talked about the Overlook Hotel. You think about Amityville Horror. In this movie, too, the actual exterior of the house, the way it manifests, the rooms. I was really hoping they would pay off all the staircases and low railings like The Omen, and they really do. So, put so much personality in the creaky staircase. That attic room kind of reminded me of Black Christmas a little bit. So that personality of the house really plays a factor in these movies.
That's a really great point. Yes, it is a good haunted house. The house itself is a good house because the thing about old houses is like there's just weird spaces. Yeah, he discovers in a attic closet that there's this whole room, which apparently was the little boy's room.
So for favorite scenes, that I really like that seance scene. Basically, he's trying to figure out what's going on. So John Russell goes to the university that he's working at and talks to this professor. And he's like, "Oh, you should bring in the medium." Yeah. And so the medium comes in and they gather. Claire's there, and I think Claire's mom and the medium, and they have this whole thing set up. And it's interesting. Like I didn't understand what that cone was on the table. Mm-hmm. Apparently, it's called a spirit trumpet. But they've got the automatic writing happening. So the idea with the spirit trumpet is it would amplify the voice of the ghost that comes to visit or gets channeled by the medium. And then she's doing the automatic writing, which is essentially this idea that you become this conduit for the spirit. So her hand's just moving on the paper and the way it unfolds. I thought it was really interesting, and it ends with that super intense shattering of the glass against the wall. It kind of shocks you out of the moment. But later it leads to this scene with John. He had recorded the session on one of these old manual reel tape things, playing it back, and then you realize that the spirit's voice of the young boy has been captured. It wasn't audible during the seance, but he's answering all the questions. Like that was cool and very spooky. Well done.
Will you tell us why you are not at rest?
My father.
Joseph, did you die in this house?
My room.
How did you die? How did you die?
How did you die?
I thought the medium scene was great and very persuasive. It was, I thought, one of the better like seance scenes I've ever seen on film. It had like a sense of legitimacy to it. And apparently the director and the writers like researched what mediums do and what it's like. And that automatic writing is one of the things that mediums can do to communicate with the dead. There's the scene I liked, and there's a scene that I want to give the Cheese Award to.
Nice.
The scene I liked was when the staircase banister got set on fire. I was fascinated by it because I'm not sure how they did it. There's no CGI in 1980. So you really had to set a banister on fire. And it's such a long banister that you just see the fire go down. But the fire wasn't like spreading throughout the house for a while. It was just burning the banister. It's a very cool effect. It really worked. And it was just a really startling moment in the film. And then the whole house like burns down. And I thought, did they burn down an actual
I know. Yeah.
for this movie? Because it clearly, those are not CGI flames. They just lit something up.
Yeah. I was thinking they'd just torched this whole mansion, but they had built a facade in front of this other house, and then the interior was all sets. But so props to them building that house looked completely believable. I would have never thought that was not a actual home or built set. It was amazing level of detail and craftsmanship they put into like the banners and the bookcases and the stairwells. It was really cool. But yeah, they burned it to the ground.
I wanted to offer the Cheese Award.
I prefer a hunk of cheese.
What do you got?
I learned that this is like one of the more well-remembered scenes of this movie. The wheelchair that chases a woman down the stairs, where you think you could have just slightly pushed it and then saved yourself the trouble of running for your life. It's a wheelchair from 1909 with dust on it. It's not moving very fast.
And it's a little boy's wheelchair, so it's like sort of like one of those like babies strollers that kids push around. The menace factor was pretty low on that thing.
And Trish, she reacts like she's being chased by the most terrifying monster in the world. She falls down a flight of stairs. The wheelchair just didn't quite have the menace I think that they were hoping for. So that's the Cheese Award, unfrightening wheelchair mechanics.
The only other thing I will note on Wikipedia under related works, it says that there was a film made in 1987 by Italian director Lamberto Bava, and he called this film Until Death, and it said it was an unofficial made-for-television film that was a sequel of this movie. Well, it has actually no connection to this film in any shape or form, but I thought that was a good marketing ploy that you just attach or create a movie, and then you say, oh yeah, it's the sequel to this film. And so I did watch the trailer to that, and I was like, this has nothing to do with the film that I just watched. So I just thought that was random and hilarious.
That is a freaking brilliant idea.
Maybe we should go into the Changeling Wikipedia entry and say, and George Scott's favorite podcast was SlashBack Cinema.
That's a fantastic idea. Every movie we talk about, we should add SlashBack Cinema into the Wikipedia.
Every Wikipedia.
SlashBack Cinema solved the murder of this child in 1909.
Joseph, he wants me to listen to SlashBack Cinema. Lost Johnny.
You're choking me up. You're good at that little Joseph voice. It's like a hidden talent we never knew you had.
Thank you. It's on my resume.
I think when we do the closing, you should do it in the little Joseph voice. Thank you for listening to SlashBack Cinema. So,
Stabby scores.
Stabby scores, yes.
Yeah, what do we? And we should set it up because we don't do this, and people are like, "Well, what's your stabby range?"
Right,
listeners. The range is from 1 stabby for to 5 stabbies for. Oh yeah, this is some golden epic stuff right here. So
yes, you want me to go first?
Yeah, what you got?
All right, here's the thing. I'm giving this movie 3 stabs, right up the middle. And I'm not a fan of middling scores because I didn't think it was a great horror movie. And I didn't think it was very scary. A lot of times where I thought it was supposed to be scary, it wasn't. But there's no doubt that like the performances are really good. George C. Scott is great. It's really fun to see him in this movie. The story is kind of fascinating to watch. But it's also, the reason I didn't give it a lower score is I found it kind of historically interesting. Like I was thinking a lot about The Sixth Sense and how this movie really seems like the predecessor to ghost stories that'll come up in the last 25 years. It seems like it was really influential. What about you?
Nice. I'm gonna go with 3.5 stabs.
A little more love.
A little bit higher than where you're at. I thought it was a great story. It was definitely not in terms of level of horror. It's not a scary film. It's got that kind of spookiness and it's this slow burn, which I appreciated. Like, it really takes its time. The movie has a lot of like character and style. And I really liked how it was like peeling back layers to the story. I feel like they really paid it off well in the end. I think it's a really classic haunted house tale, but not as scary as some of the other ones out there.
Yeah.
And it does feel a bit like an older film. It doesn't have that, like, you go back and you do feel like you're watching a bit of a period piece, like you were saying. And 60s might be even right versus 70s.
Yeah.
It's a different way of filmmaking that I don't think you see nowadays.
That wraps up another trip down memory lane. It's funny to call this memory lane since I never saw this movie before, but we remember the 80s, so that's the memory.
We were born and alive when this movie came out. Don't forget to follow us on our socials. We are on TikTok. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, the other meta platforms. If you like the show, leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast.
We want to hear from you. If you have a favorite memory of the 70s or 80s or a classic horror movie you'd like us to dissect, look, we took this recommendation. We'll take your recommendation. So drop us a line at slashbackcinema.com. Your suggestions keep the conversations alive.
Thank you for tuning into SlashBack Cinema. Joseph says he'll see you next week.
Well done.